Yeah, that's the biggest challenge. That's also why audio is always, even though audio has fully emerged, it's no longer an emerging channel. It's still sometimes a channel that creates friction when you want to programmatically buy. Could be related to ID, and the IDs like well, when you actually the identification listener identification problem has two two challenges. One is on the targeting, but the other one is on the reporting. Because again, advertisers wants to know if the media work, and if you don't have those identifier, sometimes it's difficult for them to track. And what is more complicated is also the law is changing. I think it's good because it protects the consumer, but makes things even more difficult. So basically, if we want to keep podcasts in the open internet where we keep the RSS distribution and not rely just on, let's say, YouTube or Spotify walled garden, then we need to connect the dots or create a bridge with the buy side. And the buy side are expecting one-to-one targeting, which is possible to do. The mechanics are there, but the capacity of a buyer to identify the audience is where it's a challenge. So what we've done is, one, first just clean up the space, because it may be obvious that people are consuming podcasts on, let's say, Apple Podcasts, but if you have a DSP used to buy on Chrome or on any like normal display or video things, they just don't know what it is. So they won't buy because they don't know what it is. So we had to normalize all of those apps. And again, like apps will have, I'm sorry, it's a bit technical, but I know a lot of your listeners are also technical. It requires bundle ID, because if there's no bundle ID, the DSP do not know what it is. It considers it's web, but we know it's a mobile app. So we need to produce those bundles ID and everything. So all of this helped the DSPs and the programmatic buyers to understand what they're buying and making it easy. Then the other thing is we need to connect the dots. So we need to say, oh, because again, as we know with the IAB standard, podcasts could be downloaded in a series of chunks. But for a DSP that is not used to this, they would see like multiple users and will get confused in terms of pacing, frequency cap, and all of that. So we need to help simplify how we send a signal back to the DSPs. That's why we've created a synthetic Triton ID. So they see the Triton ID, and when it's the same ID, they know it's the same user, even though it might be called like a few times in a row or not. So it avoids like frequency capping and pacing problem. And then the last bit is, how do you connect an IP only to something they know? So this is where we signed actually a partnership at the beginning of the year with a company called ID5. It's actually, we're in London. It's a London-based company led by a French guy. It's, I suppose, like they import everyone like me, French, but from Quebec and London. So basically that startup is a startup that saw a need, not just in audio, but in general, on how to help get the various persistent ID. Because when you read the news for the past few years with the deprecation of cookies, everyone is saying, oh, we have a cookie-less solution. We have a cookie-less solution. What they mean is not a cookie-less solution. What they mean is a third-party cookie-less solution. But what they're pushing is their own unique persistent ID. So basically what you end up with is everyone has a persistent ID. So Xender will have the Xender persistent ID, Google will have the Google persistent ID, the Trade Desk will have the persistent ID, and actually the Trade Desk has two. They have UUID 1 and UUID 2. So then you can imagine that if you have like one ID, and then you call like Triton, we have 45 DSPs. So it means you need to send 45 different IDs. But you don't want to send the Trade Desk ID to Yahoo or the Yahoo ID to Google, because they wouldn't know what to do. And if you just send the IP, they don't know what to do about it, because they also presume that you need to have a consent, because they won't take the full IP range if they don't trust the source. They will automatically obfuscate the IP, then you'll lose even the targeting and the pacing and all of that. So that's why with ID5, which is not a typical device graph as we often allude to them in the US, where they basically just plow the internet, try to connect the dots, give that back to the publisher, and good luck. This is just like scrapping the internet and hoping for the best. What ID5 does is they have a network of partners such as Triton. And to contribute any identifier, you need to have a consent string. So they don't take an ID without a consent. So it means that if you use that ID, it has been consented. So it means in terms of privacy and fines, you're okay. So you send it, in the IAB, they created a specific way to share that. It's called an extended ID. So what it means is when we call a DSP, we send the main ID, which could be in podcast only an IP address, and the Triton synthetic ID. And then as an extended ID, if it's the trade desk, and using ID5, we find the UUID1, which is a cookie-based ID. We can send it as an extended ID. So how the trade desk reads this is, I have like the main ID, which I recognize. And then, I also have an extended ID. And that extended ID, because it's ID5 and I have a partnership with them, is consented. So it means I can use it without getting sued by the legislators because I'm abusing private data. So when we do this, suddenly it triggers the ID graph of the trade desk. So if the trade desk has, so what it means is like the retailers like Walmart and all these guys, they're pushing their first party data. That first party data is converted into UUID1 cookie base or UUID2, which is a hashed email, a hashed phone number. And when we send the UUID1, suddenly like it connects the dot. And then suddenly they can map it. So basically it goes from the trade desk seeing only IP address with a few percentage points of addressability to maybe 2/3 of what we're sending being addressable in the US. And some other markets might be lower, but in the US, it's important. But that's really key because suddenly they can recognize that user and then apply data from DMP or target or retarget the user from the retail media. And it also means they can track if that person goes on the point of sale of that retailer, saying, hey, that person that listened to stuff you should know, they actually converted on your point of sale and they bought milk at Walmart or whatever, because they can connect it with that ID5 connection in the graph from the trade desk. And what it means is that the buyer, so for an open marketplace buy, they will see this as fully addressable impression. So if for them, like I'm throwing numbers that are just for the sake of explanation, let's say they buy runoff network at $2 CPM, they would say, I'm willing to pay my own user $12 CPM. So without the ID5 enrichment and all of the work that we did with the trade desk and other DSP as well as ID5, it would be a $2 for a podcast, even though it's stuff you should know or really like specialized podcasts. And suddenly with this, they're paying 12. So for the publisher, like that's a huge jump of revenue. So that's why we're finding partners like this. We're working on other type of solution with clean rooms to be able to bring clean rooms, use IP address, use UUID2. So it's like making a potion. So you need to mix certain ingredients and then it gives a recipe that will be applicable for each campaign, each DSP to increase their capacity to target, but also measure the outcome.